You're using my time up. Well, just another run-of-the-mill couple of days, eh? Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Secretary of State. Not now here, but thanks to John Healey. Particularly thanks to the Prime Minister and to all the other fabulous people who've been at this event and have spoken at it. You know I like to walk up and down, don't you? If I started at one end and walked all the way to the other and then came back again, I'd have run out of time. So I might just hover around here. I'm going to start by a few thank yous. And then I'm going to say, I mean, how on earth do you try to encapsulate 13 years into less than 30 minutes? So the answer is I'm not even going to try. I do want to think more about the future than about the past. But thank you. I honestly, in the 13 years I have worked at the National Housing Federation, I have been blessed by working with about 60 brilliant board members and about 500 brilliant members of our staff. I owe all of you a huge debt, because without your support, without all the work that you do that I end up taking the credit for, I'd never have been able to do any of it. And it has been a real joy working with some incredibly, words people use about me, talented, passionate, that's definitely true, committed, hardworking people who really, really care about the quality of work. And I think you just need to look around this event over the last 2 days. There have been hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of work by my colleagues gone into this. And you've barely seen them because the whole thing has run so smoothly. They are an incredible and talented bunch. The people who run the events, the people who provide all the background, the people who you know, who do the policy work, our external affairs managers, all the people in the office who help to support all of that, who even make sure our computers work. It's been fantastic. So thank you to all of those. We've been talking about disruptors just in the last couple of hours. Somewhere around the building, I'm not entirely sure where, I've bought my own little band of disruptors. My family, including my 3 grandchildren, who are going to be around somewhere, and who are absolutely one of the main reasons that I've decided to step back from full-time executive work. They're absolutely gorgeous. And my family knows how much I owe them. My wife, Carol, all of them know how much they've helped me, how much they've supported me, and how much they've absolutely made sure I never got above myself. I'm going to thank the sponsors. Now listen carefully, sponsors. There are a lot of you, and I'm not going to mention all of you because it would take too long and I would forget at least someone. I'm going to mention 2. I'm going to mention Savills because they're our headline sponsors. And you have to mention your headline sponsors, don't I? Robert, if you're still in the room, I hope you're back next year. Well done, thank you. Still making adverse comments about the brilliance of housing associations. Still challenging, and paying a damn sight more than you've paid this year. And I also want to thank Saxton Bamfile. They are the other ones that I'm going to mention in particular for 2 reasons. One, because we're having a drinks reception kind of for me after this, and they're paying for it. So well done to Saxton Bamfile, but also because you helped, well, you went through the management of the process by which we recruited Kate. And of all the things that I was concerned about, I knew I was going to leave a sector in good heart. I knew I was going to leave an organization in good heart with great people. But you do want to be confident about the person that you're leaving that responsibility to. And I'm very confident about the contribution that Kate will make. So I know you're not in the room, Kate, but this should get back to you. Welcome, and I have no doubt at all that you're going to be a brilliant chief executive of the National Housing Federation. To move on a little bit, the whole event's been fantastic. The quality of the thinking, the input, the way that people have engaged has been great. But the thing I've been most inspired by is the whole sense that this is a conference that is looking to the future with a renewed degree of optimism. And two things this afternoon. We had the final of the Young Leaders competition, and then, of course, we've had the Greenhouse and the Dragons. So this is the moment at which I am going to announce the winner of the Young Leaders competition. To help me to do this, I want to invite up onto the stage Mark Lawrence, who's the editor of 24 Housing, whose competition it actually is, and Molly Bishop, the winner from last year, who is going to be here symbolically to hand over her crown. Something that Molly has talked a lot about. Come on up. There were... Anyone who was in the room this afternoon for the Young Leaders final will know what a bunch of talented people we've got. We knew it anyway, but the fact, the quality, the commitment, I mean, it really is absolutely fabulous. And not an easy decision. I mean, of the three people who were actually in the room, there was a strong case to be made for each one of them to be winners. But it's a competition. And we've had to do some judging, and we've decided, by the faintest whisker, our incredibly worthy winner is Katie Howells. Well done. Fabulous. Stand here. Obligatory pictures. You smiling, guys?
I am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. You were absolutely fantastic. I've been asked, loads of times, I've been asked, is this the day that you're going to cry? And I honestly didn't think I was. I certainly wasn't prepared for the tear in my eye listening to some of the things that you guys were saying. And I want to tell you that I am incredibly proud to be the chief executive of a trade association that has run this kind of program. Honestly, there are not many trade associations out there that would do something like this. And there are not many trade associations who would be able to attract the quality of people and the quality of thinking that you have all done. I am in no doubt at all that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those will make a real and profound difference. And the object was not just, important though this is, for you to do this as a kind of exercise, an extended training event. I mean, that on its own was pretty good. But the object of the exercise was to love problems and find a solution to them. And you've found some solutions, and I am absolutely certain that we are going to see these solutions making a real difference to people's lives. So thank you for that. It has been an interesting 13 years. There have been some amazing moments, and I know that there are people out there who, you're wanting the big reveal, aren't you? You know, you're wanting me to be nasty to people all those things you haven't said. And I kind of think, well, I generally think I've tried my best to say it like it is. And I'm not going to break the habits of a lifetime and start being gratuitously nasty about anyone. Anyone who has to ask me who I think was the worst housing minister in my tenure does not know me. And there have been some big moments during that time. The occasion in 2007, where working with the then Labour government, I think we'd persuaded the government at the time and the housing minister, Yvette Cooper, that she needed to find £8.4 billion to help us to build 155,000 new homes. And she did. Didn't quite work the way we'd expected because there was a little matter of a global financial crash. But there was a real commitment there, a real investment in our future and in the work that we do. And then there was the global financial crash and some of the challenges that came with that. And a fiscal stimulus package, John Healey talked about that, and the investment in housing. And I really have to admit that it is a huge trade secret that one of the key reasons that we were able to continue building through that huge recession and enormous downturn was because we had the support of government. That's what helps us to be counter-cyclical. Then, actually, we have more capacity to be counter-cyclical on our own now. But the next recession, when it comes, and it will come, because economic cycles always ebb and flow, the next recession, when it comes, James, if you're still Secretary of State, can we cut out the time period bit, and when you know it's a recession, pump more money into housing and housing associations, because we build homes, we keep the economy moving, we create jobs, we stimulate local businesses, it's tangible, and the money is repaid by people buying the homes or by paying the rent. It is always economically rational. And this is one of the things that I argued all the way through the period of austerity economics, and in my view, I think austerity politics, that of course it made no sense at all to carry on borrowing to deal with revenue deficits. That's taking a hole and digging and digging and digging. But I was never able to work out why chancellors could not see that borrowing for investment at a time when the cost of money was at historic low and could have supported us in building the homes that we needed and doing all these other good things that come, and where none of the cost of that would have been, over time, a charge on taxpayers, but would have been repaid by people paying rent and by people buying the homes. I was never able to understand why we couldn't do more of that. And when Sajid Javid was Secretary of State and went off to see the Chancellor and said, can we have £50 billion of new borrowing, please, to invest in housing? Well done, Sajid Javid. That's the right argument. It remains the right argument. It probably won't happen. But we have to keep making the case. And this is the other thing, that we have to keep making the case. We have to keep making the case for housing. We have to keep making the case for the people who need our homes. The work that we did with Crisis, the research that we commissioned from Heriot-Watt University and Glen Bramley, demonstrated this isn't flippant stuff. This is not people just in the background playing silly games. It's serious, proper research that we now have an assessed lack in our economy, in our nation now, of 4 million homes. And if your economy is 4 million homes light, what that means is there's a generation of people in their 30s who have written off in their own minds any prospect of ever being an owner-occupier. And it also means that if you think back to when so many housing associations in this room were formed 50 years ago, at that time of a kind of great sense of public outrage about poor quality housing, the number of people who were homeless or badly housed, that sense that we had to do something about it. Not someone else. It wasn't someone else's job. It was community activism. It wasn't a linear thing. Cathy Come Home, Shelter, Crisis, new housing associations. These things all happened together because there was a strong and profound sense that not someone else has to do something about this, but we do. That happened at a time when there were 60,000 children living in temporary accommodation. Today, in 2018, there are 120,000 children living in temporary accommodation. We've done our best, folks, but it ain't good enough. It is just not good enough. Not by us, not by our colleagues in local government, not by people in central government, not by the people who invest. As a nation, that is a record of failure. Still the 5th or 6th biggest economy in the world, and we have 120,000 children living in temporary accommodation and a generation of people who think that owner-occupation is something for other people. It does not have to be like that. It never had to be like that. The housing crisis that we all know and acknowledge, that government itself has said has led to a broken housing market, did not, I'm sorry about this, but it did not happen by accident, and it was not inevitable. It happened because of decisions that we made or failed to make, where we said, well, okay, there's maybe not quite enough new homes, but we're not going to take the view away from the end of my garden now that I am well housed. That remains a serious problem. A narrative that says we don't have enough land in this country. We're a small, tiny, crowded island. Nonsense. Less than 2% of our land mass has got houses on it. Less than 2%. Really? It doesn't take very much land to build quite a lot of homes. And I travel around the length and breadth of the country. I sit on trains. I drive around. I mainly sit on trains. Sometimes they even move. And I look out of the window and I see a settlement that's obviously got about 1,500 people in it. And I think, you know, if we put another 50 houses there, it would not change the face of the nation, but doing that for every one of these settlements would be most of the way to ending the housing crisis. We have to change the narrative about land and land use, and we have to change the narrative that says it's a good idea to give landowners a residential planning consent and let a piece of land that today is worth £10,000 tomorrow be worth £2.75 million, and they get all the benefit, and none goes back into the infrastructure and into the schools and into the social housing that we all need. Indeed, precisely the mechanism that allowed us not just to build all these new towns after the war, but all the urban extensions, the period where we were building 350,000 homes a year, what we now need. We've made huge progress in our relationship with government over the last 3 years from a low point. And we know that it was a low point. It would be foolish to try to pretend that it was not. From a low point where our work was being roundly dissed by people in government. And we were asked some pretty penetrating and searching questions. And frankly, I think we've responded really well to those questions. I think we've paid attention, and I think we've thought not just about what can others do, but what can we do. This is something I've thought about a huge amount recently because of all the 50th anniversaries. That you can make a case that the vacant possession market value of all the assets owned by housing associations is somewhere in the region of £1 trillion. Might be a bit less, but it's a big, fat, round number. That is a lot of asset that we've got. We've got about 8,000 or 9,000 committed, really impressive board members around the country, and something like 150,000 people who work in housing associations. More people work in our sector than are in the British Army. We are drivers of local economies, often the biggest employer in an area where the work that we do is adding economic benefit, economic value. This is an asset base that if you were to marry it with that sense of pioneering, visionary, we are going to do something about this, that 50 years ago led people to set up New Lawn Housing Trust, the one I used to run, or London and Quadrant, or the hundreds of others that started in the 10 years from 1965 onwards. Well, you put those two things together, you have an unstoppable force. There have been changes in our sector. We used to think that you built homes for social rent and retained them for social rent in perpetuity. There are still people out there who think that's what we should do, and that is only what we should do. I disagree. Asset management is not just about looking after the stock that we've actually got. Asset management is about sitting and thinking creatively about how we use all of the assets at our disposal as the best means of delivering our social purpose and meeting our mission. Because this is a sector that is now and always has been defined by and driven by social purpose and mission. A lot of people misunderstand this. And we know this. We know the stories. We know the arguments. We know the people who look at some of the big commercial things that housing associations are doing, and they say, you've stopped caring. You're just big commercial organizations. Well, let me put a different point of view to that. Let me put a point of view that says, just imagine a world where you get some money from government and some money that you borrow. And with that, you build 25 social rent homes. And you keep them as social rent in perpetuity. Job done. 100% of what you've done is social mission. Well done. Or imagine an alternative reality where these same organizations build 100 homes. And they sell 30 of them and provide 20 for shared ownership and maybe 20 for market rent. Instead of 25 homes for social rent, with that little bit of public investment and the profit that you can make from that commercial development, you might end up with 30 homes for social rent. So where there were 25, there are now 30. Where there were 25 homes, there are now 100. Where there was a little single tenure development, there's now a larger mixed tenure development. Drawback, looked at from the outside, only 30% of that looks like social purpose. Oh, you've lost your sense of social purpose. You've all just become commercial. Nonsense. That is creative thinking. That is people thinking there are different ways that we can do this. I talked at one of our conferences a number of years ago about the connection between mission and mechanism. People often mistake mission for mechanism. They say, you've changed the way you've done things. You've changed your mission. No. What we've done in this sector under some very, very trying and challenging circumstances is hold on tight to that sense of social purpose and to that profound sense of mission. And in doing so, we've allowed ourselves to be brave enough to use a different mechanism. Always understand the difference between the two. Social purpose, mission, the objectives for which we exist, we need to guard them with our lives because they are completely central to who we are and what we do. But mechanism, whatever works, use whatever is going to make the biggest and most important difference. What have we seen from the greenhouse projects? People thinking differently about mechanism. But I challenge anyone to say any of that didn't look like social purpose and genuine mission of housing associations. That's what we do. That's what we have become increasingly good at. And where are we now? Well, we're now in an environment where we have 2.7 million homes, housing 6 million people, and we have, for the first time in our economy's entire history, and not quite uniquely in the world, but there are not many other places in the world, we now have large-scale volume developers of new housing whose fundamental business model is a mixed tenure business model, where we want to build the mixed tenure, mixed income, economically and socially integrated and resilient places ourselves, and where we have the capacity to do that. I do not think any of us in this room have yet properly understood the power and the potential that comes with that. I mean, just think about it. It's not just 5 or 6 big national housing associations that can do that. Anyone that has critical mass in a particular area, who really understands the market, the place that you work in, has that potential. And that's great, isn't it? Because if we are to get to a position where we are once again building 300 or more thousand homes every year, where we are getting anywhere near to building 90,000 new homes a year for social rent, and all the other kinds of tenure that we need, we're going to have new towns, new market villages, new settlements, new urban extensions. And where better to start thinking about who can deliver that than organizations that exist for the benefit of the community, who make profit but reinvest it in delivering a social mission rather than paying dividends to shareholders. People who don't stop just because the economy's taken a downtick because they can't sell their product, but people who say, now, instead of that property being for rent, we can make it available for sale, or vice versa. And I think the single most important change that we've seen in the last 12 months is the agreement now between us and Homes England, with the absolutely clear support of government, reinforced and extended by the Prime Minister yesterday, that we don't do bureaucratic short-term annual programs that are defined by knowing the site, the tenure mix in advance, but are grown-up strategic partnerships that look to the future, that invest in the future, that say, yeah, we can now properly think for and plan for the future. This is a sector, you are people who care. And the thing that has been inspiring for me about the job that I do is that I go out and meet people in housing associations. I have traveled the length and breadth of the country. I have yet to meet a housing association that cannot show me something it's deeply, deeply proud of. And the things that you are deeply, deeply proud of vary hugely. Some people are proud of the ability they have to take people who seemed very far away from the jobs market and help them into sustainable, long-term, secure employment. That's a pretty impressive thing to be able to do. Or people who've invested in a whole range of local community support facilities. Or people who are proud of the number of new homes that they've built and the fact that they are building mixed tenure. Or the people who've been at the forefront of saying we can build energy-efficient homes. We really can. We can build homes that cost nothing to heat, because all you need to do is build them so well that the fact of living in it is going to be good enough. That creates enough energy to heat it. Is one of those organizations better than the other? Of course not. A small rural housing association that's just built 6 new homes, well, that might be the thing that keeps that village shop or even the school or the pub open in a rural England where our shops and schools and pubs are disappearing far too fast, where the character of rural England is changing because too many people think that they're theme parks rather than living, breathing, dynamic communities. And what do you need to make sure they remain living, breathing, dynamic communities? You need to build new homes. We do this. We understand it. It's absolutely inspiring. The people who care, who go the extra mile. Have we got everything right? No, we haven't. I mean, we need to be honest about this, don't we? Grenfell asked us the most profound questions that we could possibly be asked. And some of the questions we can answer clearly, directly, and with a degree of confidence and pride about the things that we've done. But I know, and you know, that tenant satisfaction levels are not as high as they used to be. We know that many, many people worry that they're not being paid attention to. I remember having a conversation, the context doesn't really matter, about an organization that said, we're brilliant at following our complaints procedure. We absolutely log everything. We can prove beyond argument that every complaint that we receive, we've dealt with properly through that procedure. And if something goes to the ombudsman, we always do what the ombudsman asks. And yet people are still unhappy. Why? Because you are concentrating on the sodding procedure rather than listening to the complaint. And that's pretty fundamental, isn't it? Because the thing that, in amongst all of the other things that we do, the thing that every single person who runs a housing association, every person who lives in a housing association home, everyone who works for a housing association, we know that there is something really, really profound at the middle of all of that. And that is the one-to-one relationship that even the very biggest housing associations have with every single one of their residents. And that is a relationship that you have to get right every time. And those of us who say we've maybe taken our eye off the ball of that a little bit, they might just have a point. And Grenfell doesn't demonstrate that that's what we've all done, but it does demonstrate that in a whole range of ways, and most profoundly, frankly, in the building industry, there have been systemic failures that can now properly be described as catastrophic failures. We've paid attention to that. The response of our sector to the lessons of Grenfell, to the Hackett report, to the things that government has asked us, have been great. But they are big challenges. And we do, as a sector, still have enormous challenges, don't we? We have the challenge of ending a housing crisis. We have the challenge of rebuilding some of those relationships. We have the challenge of building trust. We have, as Katie said in her response to one of the questions, not quite like this, we have the challenge and responsibility of leadership. And leadership doesn't just rest with the chair of the board and the chief executive. Leadership is something that happens at every level of the organization. I'm running out of time. I need to stop. I mean, I've been doing this for 13 years, you know. There's a lot there. But I do just want to say something very quickly about leadership and sector leadership. I'm sure you've all heard me do this before. You know, think of a leader that you admire. You got a picture of a leader that you admire in your head? Put your hand up if you can describe that person as a pessimist. And we never can, because the leaders that we admire are always optimists. They are always, in my view, because this is what leadership is actually about. They are always people who are thinking about how we make the future better than the present. And you don't have to be the chief executive to do that. Every single person in this room has the ability, the potential to imagine a future that's better than the present and then start the process of investing it. That is the challenge that housing associations have. And the good news is that you are brilliant at responding to that challenge. I mean, I always finish a big platform session like this by saying thank you. It's like, I mean, lots of people do. It's the full stop at the end of a presentation, isn't it? So this time, I'm going to say thank you slightly more expansively. Thank you for the opportunity to work with you. Thank you for the opportunity to see all the things that you do, the commitment, the concern, the compassion, the care. Thank you for being inspiring. Thank you for allowing me to have such an important role. Thank you for allowing me to be the custodian of the story that we tell about housing associations, that you live. Thank you for being inspiring, as you are. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do the job, I guess above all others, that I would want to do. And not many of us get the chance to do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, 13-year journey, and for me, this is the point where the train stops and I jump off. It is not for you. We are a huge, important sector. We care. We have social purpose. We are mission-driven. We have assets. We have creativity. We have the ability to imagine a future that's better than the present and invest in delivering it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's who you are. It's what you do. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go out and have a drink, shall we? Thank you very much.